The sun has left and forgotten.
Your stories don't define
me.
you,
It's
but how you tell
dark,
them will.
I
Hi, I'm
cannot
Sarah Elkins, your host
see.
and chief story maker
Why
at
does
Elkins
this rain
Consulting.
pour down? I'm
I call myself a story
drowning
maker because
in
I know
a
that
sea.
everything we do can create a story. And the question is always, are my actions and behaviors in alignment with the stories that I want to be able to tell later? Are the stories that I'm creating right now the stories that I want other people to tell about me later? I think about this all the time in terms of when I'm doing something, when I'm making a decision. Are these things that I would be proud of? Are these things that I want my children to talk about when I'm gone? Listeners, you're in for a treat today. I met Tracy MacDonald through LinkedIn, but particularly because we both have been involved with TEDx U Street Women. Now, that is an amazing organization coming up on their 5th year of providing TEDx events. And you'll learn more in the links associated with this podcast episode. But for now, what I'd really like to do is introduce you to Tracy. We had a conversation probably about 2 months ago and immediately connected over a variety of travel experiences. So you're in for a treat today, listeners. Tracy, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Well, we talked earlier about all the travel that you've done and your work currently and your desire to get on a TEDx stage. But what I'd really love to hear is the question that I ask at the beginning of most of these episodes, which is tell me and our audience something about yourself that most people might not know about you, something that's not on your bio, it's not on your LinkedIn profile. And the reason I ask this question is that we have a tendency to judge people and create an image of them based on one soundbite or one post. And by asking this question, we give the audience an opportunity to see the complexity of the person on the other side of the microphone. So, what can you share with us?
I love this question. I would say my connection to nature is not something I speak about a lot on the surface. I'm a former federal agent, I'm a counterterrorism instructor, a diplomat. Um, People don't know that behind the scenes, I spend a lot of time looking at raindrops on leaves and patterns in flowers and the fractals in nature and taking pictures of them. I think because we've changed countries so many times in the past couple of decades, it's something that's very grounding to me. The languages may be different, the culture, the houses that we're living in, you're restarting your life over, community, all of it. And nature is always consistent. And I can go out and I can look for the beauty, and I find it really grounding. And if you opened my computer and looked at my photographs, you would be surprised by the number of leaves and nature photos that I have in there, the way the light is pouring through some some pines, or the light and shadow, chiaroscuro, as they say in Spanish, how the light is dancing on the lawn. I'm mesmerized by that. And really, although I grew up as an Episcopalian, I have become much more aligned and felt much more spiritual when I'm in nature. It's kind of become my church.
Mm, I love that. Of course, I love that. I didn't even know that we had that in common. I don't think we talked about that the last time we chatted. Thank you for sharing that. I have a bunch of questions that statement generated in my head. And the first is, when you immediately started talking about leaves and raindrops on leaves, and it seemed like you had a particular image in mind from a particular location. There was like something in your expression. What what was that?
Probably from Gabon, all the tropical flowers and just so much flora and fauna and these turquoise kingfisher birds flying around and these huge butterflies in West Africa. And I would go out with our dog every morning, and it was like a treasure hunt. I would take my camera, and the leaves were enormous. You know, sometimes these banana tree leaves that were just casting a shadow like a building. And it looks like mercury. If you've ever looked at a raindrop in the sunlight on a leaf, it almost looks like silver,
Mm.
silver liquid. Yeah.
Where did you live in Gabon? Was it a standard house like that you would experience somewhere in the United States? And how did you get to that nature? And I'm asking this question because we have listeners from all over the world. And when I think of nature, of course, my first thought is my experiences, which have been in the last 25 years, Montana. So big mountains. The wildlife is very different here from a more tropical place. I've seen wolves. I've seen a variety of different kinds of bears. I've seen bighorn sheep and mountain goats. Um, we experience mountain lions, all different kinds of deer and antelope. And our flora and fauna is going to be really different. So when I think of nature, my first initial image is when I'm on the mountain near my home with a variety of evergreens, very few deciduous trees. But when I think of my sister who lives in the Bay Area, San Francisco and East Bay area, I think of how much bigger and broader the leaves grow, the succulents that can get to a 4-foot diameter. Um, what is that? Not yucca, jade plants. So when you're describing what you saw in Gabon, what I'm imagining is tropical, lush, right in a city, which is what I experience when I walk through San Francisco. So what are you describing to me here?
Yes, we were on an embassy compound, and they try to make the housing as much like the US as possible. So there's a comfort zone there for these families that are coming and living in a different country. But it was just all around us. Gabon is coastal, but Libreville, we're always in capital cities, the embassies. Libreville was an oil town. And I have to say, right outside of our compound were a lot of dirt roads, and it looked very dilapidated and run down, a lot of it. But there were these little pockets, just these little havens, trees that had been there forever. They were just enormous. And really, part of your question that I haven't answered is, when did my connection with nature start? I think probably as a child during my summers and things, but I worked from high school through college, right out of college until my husband and I moved overseas with his first tour with the State Department. And for the first time ever in my 40s, I wasn't working and I felt really lost. And not only that, but we dropped into East Africa and I had an 18-month-old. I didn't know anyone there. This was a whole new lifestyle. I came from a banking background. I had spent time overseas, but I had been in London, on the high street. And so I found myself with this baby, and it was very rural. There weren't a lot of activities or places to go. We were 4 hours from the border at South Africa, and there was just all this wildlife around me. And I would go outside with the child, and I realized I had been so office bound and classroom bound for years that, of course, I would see glimpses. I love looking at the clouds or finding a feather on the ground. But I, for the first time, was spending hours a day outside and surrounded by so much beauty. And that's when I started to pick up my camera because I needed something to do. I didn't have work to define me. And so I tapped back in to some passions from childhood, which were I always loved a camera. I had a Vivitar camera, I think at the age of 8, the little one that looked like
Uh-huh.
a small brick with the clicker, in the
I
70s,
had
a
the
child of the
disc.
yeah.
I remember the disc camera. I loved
I'm
that
a
thing.
child of the 70s, but my mother was, really supportive of creative pursuits, and, I think back then you had to actually take the film in to get developed, and it would be a bunch of just throwaway pictures, but she didn't care. She's like, "Yep, keep going, just you'll get better." And, really over the course of the last 15 years is when I just developed this relationship with nature, and really some out of loneliness. I could go outside and feel like I was communing with the birds and the lizards. And then, of course, we were in this amazing location where a very short drive from us, there were giraffes and elephants and rhino. We were really fortunate. And so I came to love the bush. I think if I had known in college I could have gone to South Africa and worked on a game reserve, that's what I would have done. But I was at an all-women small liberal arts college, and it was very much about, do you want to be a lawyer or a doctor or an economist? Or, it was a little bit more serious.
Mhm.
And, I don't regret it, but I needed to find myself, and nature helped me do that.
Mm. There's so much here, so much. My first thought is that it's never too late to choose a new label. It's never too late to say, "I'm outdoorsy," and then spend time outdoors to own that label. I'm a lover of nature, can start at 40 or 50 years old. It doesn't have to start as a child. You don't have to be introduced to it by your family or by your young adult environment. That was the first thing that popped into my head. Um, so when you think about that experience, did you have hesitation or fear? Because I know while I can look back and realize I was outside a lot more than I gave myself credit for as a young adult. I considered myself a city girl. But I remember being kind of afraid of bugs and getting bitten by things, and I still don't love it, but after spending so much time outdoors and learning how to fly fish, bugs and crawling things are more curiosity to me than they were then. Did you have fears like that? Especially, I mean, you're in a place that is so foreign and you have a baby with you. What got you through that? Did you have them, and then what got you through that?
I definitely had them, especially when we got to Africa and there were so many poisonous plants and snakes and vipers and vectors. And, the med unit was giving us anti-malaria medicine that we had to take every day. So, like, mosquitoes for the first time were like little tiny terrorists inside my house, because it's not like in the States where they bite you and it's fine. They bite you and you could get very, very sick. So I felt like I was very much on high alert every time we went outside. And this is before the, apps were available on your phone, like Speak, which I still even use now. Like, oh, is this poison ivy or is this Virginia creeper? And you could use an
Mhm.
image and look up what it is, but I didn't have that back then. And I remember Ramsey was about 2, and he got a bad rash all over his body, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, what is it? The water? Is it the bark on the trees?" We had is there
What did
something
he
in the dirt?
touch? What did he
Yes, and
eat?
so,
Right?
you're just because we were for 12 years, we were in countries where we couldn't drink the water. And, trying to take a bath with a child where they say, "Don't let him ingest the water." Well, good luck, good luck. With a
Yeah.
toddler, who's going to put everything in their mouth, and of course he was fine, but, we did have a good med unit at every embassy, and I was constantly asking the PAs questions about, what do we do in these situations? And you do get briefings on some of it, but it was very much I was researching all the time, the flowers that we were touching, the plants that we were touching, because I didn't recognize so much of it. And like I had mentioned, of course, I grew up in Georgia in the South. I can tell you what a magnolia and an azalea and some very basic common Southern flowers are, but I'm not the person who walks outside and can tell you the Latin names of, the plants outdoors. So there was a lot of apprehension. By our third country, I would say I was a lot more relaxed. In fact, I joked that, instead of the 5-second rule, when you drop food on the floor and you pick it up, I'm like, we could lick the pavement. We would be fine. Especially after living in Egypt and Cairo, there was a lot of trash on the ground and stuff. So I feel like we have very strong immunities, but it's an interesting question because I was scared when I first encountered going outdoors. And then last year I went on a yoga retreat in Gabon and trekking through the part of the rainforest where there are a lot of dangerous and poisonous things. I was really nervous on that yoga hike. And, we got through it and we were fine. But even the ants are different. There's a type of ant in Africa, West Africa, they bite and it feels like bee stings. And I stepped in some and it was really painful. And I have kind of a high pain threshold. And it was not pleasant. I was not happy about
No kidding. But
it.
you did it anyway. I mean, what each of these stories is like, how many of us would that fear have stopped us? Especially with the child, because we have so much fear around our children getting hurt, and how serious it can be, especially now because we hear every horror story. I was worried raising my kids 20 years ago. Now it seems even harder because you hear so much more of the stories because of our global communication now. So I guess what I'd like to hear is two things. What do you think helped you in terms of your mindset in choosing to do this anyway, instead of holding up or, you know, I don't know, covering you and Ramsey from head to toe before you could even step out the door? What do you think helped you? What was it, your own mindset? Was it the community you created? Was it ambition? I mean, what do you attribute that persistence and resilience to?
It is a learned process. I'm someone who feels more comfortable when I'm armed with more information. So it was a conglomeration of all the things you mentioned. A little bit of bravery, where I'd think to myself, okay, look, you were a federal agent. You can do this. You can get outside. If there are snakes, we can call a zoologist and find out and ask the right questions. And I was never embarrassed or hesitant to ask questions. So that's in my favor. I'm not a wallflower in general. Um, so there was some bravery, there was being armed with information. And then I think the more you do it, the more you push yourself outside your comfort zone, the better you get at it. That's when I go and I speak to women in colleges or in high schools or whenever I can. I believe in paying it forward and mentoring other girls and women. And I always say it's always worth the risk because even if you fail, you learn something. And I do think that's why such a huge fan of this lifestyle. And it did take me years. Every post I got more comfortable. And some of it was, yes, asking other moms in the community, speaking with the doctors, even with the locals when I could speak the language, um, which interestingly, sometimes you found out from locals things that you wouldn't know from the Americans. For example, this is a tangential story, but my son was in a kindergarten in East Africa. And she said, a few weeks into it, she said, I noticed he's biting a little bit. And she said, sometimes that just means he needs deworming. And I said, I'm sorry, what? Deworming? Like a dog? And she goes, oh yeah. She goes, all the locals, we do it quarterly. And I went to the embassy and I said, do you suggest that we take this anti-worming medicine? And she goes, well, all the locals do it. She goes, we don't really, but you can try it. And so anyway, we all took in East Africa because, the vegetables are not radiated and they're not killing all the bacteria like in the States. There's a lot of
Right.
healthy with all the healthy stuff comes all the natural things like worms in the meats, in the vegetables, and we, X-ray our vegetables or whatever we do. I'm not sure what
Mhm.
the scientific word is for that in the States, but you can't put something on your counter like in the States and a tomato or something will last 3 or 4 days. Chicken, if you don't eat it that day, is not good tomorrow. Same with the vegetables, they're talk about farm to table. There there are just no preservatives in anything, which can be beautiful, but the flip side of
There's
that is
risk.
sometimes there's parasites and worms
Right.
and things.
There's
So,
risk.
um, not to take us down that, digestive
Yeah, but did
track.
it change? Did he stop biting, or was that just a toddler
Yes,
thing? Because they go through a phase.
yes.
Some.
No, no. I mean, he would get a little bit more aggressive. We would all take it as a family, and sure enough, maybe it was, the placebo effect that I was told that, but it did seem more effective, and obviously, there's other ways to tell that it's effective. My stomach felt much
Right.
better. Um, but, yeah, I think over time, just the more you practice getting outside your comfort zone, the more comfortable you become with it. And that's kind of in my nature. I like
Mhm.
challenging myself. I like overcoming obstacles. It makes me feel strong and confident. And I like modeling that, especially for other women. I joke with people here that life in America is so easy. There are no potholes. I just get in my car. I drive down a paved road. I go to a grocery store that has everything I need to make one recipe. And, we just don't take it for granted. I wish being here in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital, that we could give every taxpayer a ticket to go outside of the country because I think you learn so much about America by being outside of it. And it is important to know how much we have. And politics aside, there's a lot of tumultuousness, happening in this administration, but really, we have public libraries, we have drinkable clean water, we have breathable air. And when you have lived in countries where that is not the case, you don't take it for granted.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I I hear you on that. For many years, I've suggested that study abroad might be a requirement for students in high school and college for that exact reason, to really understand the values. One of the other things that I read a long time ago is that um, anecdotally, and I know there's research behind it, but I also know anecdotally that people who have lived outside of their own home country for whatever amount of time consider themselves more um, confident and secure in their identity. And they associate that with the fact that when you live in a place away from the environment where you grew up, particularly in a place that the culture is significantly different, maybe the language is different, then you have to start questioning your beliefs and your values because you're seeing things so different. You start to understand the difference between what you believe, what your values are, versus what you inherited through your environment of where you grew up. And I don't think necessarily that you have to completely leave the country to have that experience, but you do have to be in places that are significantly different from where you grew up.
That's right. Well, and I think expose yourself to information that's different to your lifestyle, even if that means understanding and reading about global news outside of the United States and realizing, oh, we have rights and freedoms here that other people do not enjoy. We have great medical
Mhm,
care. We have so many advantages that they just don't
mhm.
have elsewhere.
And you don't really have to go that far to experience a significantly different culture. I learned that last year when I interviewed a candidate here in Montana named Kev Ham, and he was describing traveling across just the state of Montana. during his candidacy and how different the cultures were just in the state of Montana, and particularly going to the different um, tribal reservations. The difference between the reservation near Browning and the Flathead Reservation is significant. And I could actually drive from Helena to any of those reservations within a couple of hours and have a completely different culture around me. But we don't. Like how many of us choose to even cross the bridge, much less drive an hour to be in a small Montana town and understand what rural Montanans, agricultural-based communities are living with and how different it is from our own lived experience.
Yeah. I think it takes people who are curious and who are exploratory to experience that kind of different culture when it's all right around them.
Mhm. Mm. Okay, so let's, turn back to kind of the beginning. At one point, you mentioned I was a federal agent and I should be able to manage my fear, or wherever that was when we were talking about being able to leave and be outside in an environment that holds a lot of different and significant risks from what you were used to, particularly with a toddler. So when you think about your experience as a federal agent, there are two questions, and I can come back to make sure that we reach both. But the first one is, what's the story of choosing that career? How did that happen? Coming out of college, how did that decision occur? What was the story there? And then the second is, how are you using that as you are exploring this next iteration of your career now that you're back from serving in the State Department overseas?
For the first question, I was always interested in criminal justice. And I think because the film Silence of the Lambs came out when I was in, I don't know, high school or early college, with
Jodie
Jodie
Foster,
Foster.
Anthony
Yes,
Hopkins.
yes, it was the first time I had seen a female federal agent on the screen. And I loved her role in that movie. I wanted to be her. I wanted to be an FBI profiler. And I interned with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation during college. I was in Macon, Georgia at Wesleyan. And I realized I couldn't stomach the crime scene photos. And I was so disappointed because I thought that was going to be what I wanted to do.
Right,
So I
Hollywood
still,
is very different from real life.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah, that's your
exactly.
big indication, like, "Oh, wait a minute, that's not what I thought was gonna happen."
Right?
Right.
But I'll tell you what, so I got into banking right out of college and worked some anti-fraud work, moved to London. While I was in London, 9/11 happened. And I think like a lot of Americans, I thought, that's it. I want to serve. I grew up in Columbus, Georgia. It's a military town. We have Fort Benning there. Uh, it's been renamed Fort Moore, and I think now changed back to Fort Benning. But we are a family who believes in serving. I have a lot of family in the military and the Air Force. A lot of my cousins were boys, and I kind of wanted to go off and do that too because there was this reverence in my family for the men that were going and doing that. And so I decided that I wanted to try, and I applied to the FBI. I went to the US Embassy in London before we were ever in the State Department, and I met with an FBI attaché, and he said, "Yeah, let's get you signed up for phase 1 testing." And in the meantime, I was transferred with my banking job back to Columbus, Georgia. 9/11 had happened, as I mentioned, and the Bank of America account that I had some purview over was what the hijackers had used, Bank of America cards, to purchase their flying lessons. And so Secret Service came to see us, and I got to sit down with them and open up their accounts because we were looking for time and date stamps and other purchases that the hijackers had made. And so I remember this agent, and he looked just like Clint Eastwood, no kidding.
Hmm.
And he said, "You know, we need women. You should apply to the Secret Service." And I said, "But don't you just protect the president?" I had no idea. And he said, "Well, we do that." And he said, "But we mostly do white collar crime, and we need your credit card skills." And um, it just made sense to me. There wasn't going to be the violent crime, and I wasn't going to have to look at those gory photos. And I thought, document fraud, yes, that I can handle. Counterfeit, passport fraud, housing, liens that are fraudulent. So I applied, and I was already down at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, 3/4 through my Secret Service training before I got into phase 2 testing for FBI. And it just worked out.
Wow.
So,
I think so many times we underestimate those background forensics that are required to catch people. Like, we think about the Hollywood version of FBI and Secret Service catching people. We although now, we see some of that in some, Hollywood and movies and stuff about what it takes to catch them from the banking side, from the finance side, from the, that part of the fraud side, because they have to have money. They have to transfer money to be able to do those things that they're doing, and
oh, yeah.
so I love that you got into that. It's like forensics. It is, it's forensics, but it's not body forensics, it's not crime scene forensics, and I
No.
just find that fascinating. So, you did that for years, worked for Secret Service, and then, ho ended up with the State Department. How did that happen?
Well, when I left Secret Service in Atlanta, I realized in my early 30s that, men either wanted to date me because I was wearing a weapon, or they were completely appalled by what I was doing. And so I was like, one day I would like to have a family, and all the criminal networks run around at night and on the weekends. So between that and protection, I wasn't seeing anyone. I wasn't seeing my family, my friends. There was just no life balance for me. And so I got a call to run a fraud department for a gift card company. I went and did that. But because I had my clearance with Secret Service, in the meantime, I'd met my husband, and he was up in Washington D.C. And he said, we dated. It was clear that we were going to get married, and so when I got up to Washington D.C. to be with him, I used my clearance to apply to jobs, and I became a consultant with a big group called Booz Allen Hamilton, and went down and worked at Defense Intelligence for them, working counterterrorism finance.
Mm.
So it was a good segue. I like to say too, when I'm up on stage and talking to an audience, that your skills are never wasted. And sometimes you're tapping back into skills maybe you learned early in your career. There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's like gift wrapping. You can wrap something in Christmas paper, or you can wrap something in birthday paper, or holiday, whatever holiday paper, and you can dress it up how you want, but those skills are still the skills. But how you spin it, and then how you pivot them is is, I think, really the gift of
So
being able
true.
to transition from job to
Mhm.
job.
And the question is, what language are you using and what stories are you telling that
Yes.
demonstrate those skills outside of the industry that you learned them in?
Yes, yes, it's like vanilla
Yeah,
ice cream, but you can choose different toppings.
absolutely. It's still the same.
Mhm.
Foundationally, it's still the same because as you grow, as you learn, you continue to gain those skills. So I want to turn this back around and kind of wrap us up. And when you mentioned that you do some speaking, you're entering this next uh, career transition, which a lot of our listeners are people in major transitional phases in their lives. So it could be they're in a career transition, they didn't like what they were doing, or they just lost the passion for it, and they're looking for the next thing. And that comment about wrapping up the same skills with different wrapping paper, is a perfect analogy for that. How am I switching from one industry to another, especially when it seems significantly unrelated or different? Or they're going through empty nesting, or they're recently divorced, or, coming back from a diagnosis or a long period of time away from a job. When you, think about what you're doing now and what you want to do, what does that look like for you? Do you have a particular, um, activities that light you up that you want to be doing more of? Anything that's specific or not specific?
Absolutely. Because my husband ran security for the embassy, I did not get permission to work in my field, which was also working with the military and the police, uncovering corruption and that sort of thing. And we were in a lot of hardship countries. So not only would it have been dangerous, for example, in Honduras, for me to uncover money, illicit funds tied to crime, I wasn't allowed to do it. So I really had to think, what can I do? And because most of the counterterrorism work I had done was in cleared spaces, it wasn't something really I could do over email either. And so I went back to my writing. I have 500 journals. I mean, I'm really not kidding. When our boat finally arrives from West Africa here to DC, I can't wait to unwrap them all. I've kept them since college, and I took them and started writing a fiction manuscript, and did some blogging also anytime we traveled, in addition to documenting things through photography. How I relate to the world is through writing. So I thought, well, I want to do something with this besides blogging. So I started trying to do freelancing, and I got a couple magazine articles published, and then just decided I would try to write a fiction manuscript. And that was something that I really loved. It tapped into my creativity. Um, it was a little bit connected to my love of nature because I could pull that into the writing to make it richer. I found a community that I had not had previously since I didn't have my work community. My writer friends were now my new tribe. And then through writing, people said, well, how about speaking? You should share this. Like, I think it would inspire other women. You've been in these unconventional paths in a lot of male dominated fields. And I thought, yeah, why don't I? And so we had a military coup when we were in Gabon. And long story short, my son's school financially collapsed because it was being run by the first lady and they had taken the tuition. So he had to go to boarding school. And that was very hard for all of us. That he was only 11 and he's my only child. I didn't have a baby till I was 40. And I thought, well, how can I make the best use of this? When I go and visit him, I'm all the way in the States. I can spend some time with family, of course. But I thought, well, I'll go to my alma mater and I'll speak to the women there. And then I'll go to other colleges and high schools. And I really just derive so much reward out of connecting with people in that way and sharing my experiences to illuminate the path for others. And I really want to do more of that. And that is sort of why I mean, it is why I applied to be a TEDx speaker and was thrilled to get through the application process and to meet you and others. And I very much do not want to go back into a 60-hour-a-week office job where I'm not looking at raindrops on leaves. I like human connection. I'm
Mhm.
still, of course, I believe in the advantages of technology, but I love the flexibility. I like the space for creativity that just didn't come when I was
Mm.
sitting under fluorescent lights at a desk all day. You'll laugh. I just realized I went on a walk this morning and I picked up I have a eucalyptus leaf. I mean a ginkgo, sorry, a ginkgo
Ginkgo.
leaf. And then I think in my back pocket I also have a somewhere I have a blue jay feather. I can't find it. But
Will you hold up that ginkgo leaf? Oh,
yeah.
and a stone.
This is my labradorite. So I've been surprised by the questions that I get from audiences when I speak, and one of them is, "How do you feel so brave to travel as a woman on your own?" And I don't know why I was surprised by that. These are women, like, for example, I led a leadership program at Georgia Military College last spring. These are women that are high performers. They are pushing the envelope. They are strong. They look like G.I. Jane. They are gorgeous and built and academically strong. And they're afraid of deploying. They're afraid of stepping off the compound and just the apprehension of the unknown. And so I told them, if you're a nature person, if you can get outside, you've got to find practices that center you, whether that's journaling, bring a yoga video with you that's familiar, a playlist that's familiar. I said, it's really silly, I know, but I pick up rocks and stones. I'm super into these little pieces of labradorite that just look like magic to me with their palette of ocean and sky and earth colors. And I really I want people to get out there and I want people to explore, but you do have to sort of take something from home that feels like comfort. You can take something
Mhm.
small with you like that on the road. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm
No, I agree. I agree. I find that I am asked that question a lot because I've traveled a lot by myself. I hitchhiked through New Zealand by myself for 2 weeks when I was 19. And I've been asked that question as well, especially because I'm so petite and I may look like an easy target. And I agree, having something foundational that reminds you that you're strong or reminds you that you have the foundation and the skills that you need to be successful and survive and be aware of your environment. Um, I know practicing being highly aware of my environment really helps me. So when I am hiking, I do not wear headphones. I do not listen to music anymore. I used to. I used to listen to a podcast, but now when I'm hiking, I am fully present. I can hear any sound within 100 feet of me or more. And it's not because I'm afraid, it's because I'm practicing alertness, awareness. The other thing that really helps me is owning it. And I know that the research is questionable, but I'm I don't believe that the research is as questionable about body language. And that book, the TED Talk by, oh, I'm forgetting her name. You know who I'm talking
I know
about?
who you're speaking about the superhero type
Yes,
and how
yes.
much that can instill confidence.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm forgetting her name. It's menopause brain. I'm forgetting things too often these days. I will put it in the show notes associated with this podcast episode. But
Okay.
I loved her TED Talk. I didn't love the book. I I don't think she wrote it. I think it was ghostwritten and not very well. Um, so I actually threw away my copy rather than share it with somebody because I would much rather people just watch her TED Talk. But anyway, I believe in this. If you walk into a place or out of a place as if you belong where you're standing, you are pretty much left alone. Even in nature, I find that if I am confident and I am walking as if I'm not afraid, then I'm not afraid. And I know that hormonally, when you're afraid, you send out a scent of fear. And animals and people, either consciously or subconsciously, sense that. So I remember even as a kid, before I had a fake ID, walking into a VIP event with an open bar with one of my friends. And I said, just walk in like we belong here. We dressed up like we were part of the sponsored group and we dressed up and we walked in and we were laughing and talking to each other very sophisticatedly. And oh, my ticket's inside and walked right by, went straight to the bar and got drinks. And she said, that's like magic. I have to remember this. So Thank you for sharing that because I'm in complete agreement. And thank you so much, Tracy, for joining me on this episode. It has been such a treat. Now, how do you want people to reach and follow you?
I think my blog will be listed in the show notes. If anyone's interested in foreign service life or becoming a Secret Service agent, I'm so happy to mentor people, be a resource for them along the way. You're welcome to put my personal email in there. I'm happy for people to contact me.
And
And thank you.
LinkedIn, right?
Yes, yes, and on LinkedIn, of course. Well, and
Okay.
thank you very much for this conversation and creating space. It just feels good to have unfiltered conversation. It doesn't happen that often, does it? I have a whole nother idea for you as I drop in, repatriate into the United States after 12 years. I was thinking how interesting it is how the conversations that we have with strangers. You know, I'm meeting new neighbors and meeting people, and it's interesting the stories that strangers will share with each other, the little bits as I'm getting to know my neighbors in these little incremental amounts. So
Mhm.
maybe we have another podcast to have in the future.
Absolutely. And that goes along with my TEDx talk that I'll be giving um, November 3rd, 2025. So, yes, we'll definitely have to reignite this conversation maybe after that.
I would love to.
Listeners, don't drop everything or hit pause. All of the links that we've talked about will be in the show notes associated with this episode at elkinsconsulting.com. And now it's your turn, listeners. Some of the things that Tracy said that are really strong in my memory is that when she was facing things that she was afraid of and she knew she wanted to push through, she asked a lot of questions. That's how she prepared herself and had the mindset open to taking risks. She prepared in that way and she practiced. She talked about doing this over and over and over again because knowing that once she stepped into her stretch zone once, she could stretch even further every time she did it again. She has a limited fear of failure, allowing her to learn from each thing. And here's the kicker. When she's brave, she likes how she feels about herself. She knows she's modeling the behavior she wants to see in the people around her. Friends, it's your turn. What are you going to do next that you're a little bit afraid of? That you can ask enough questions to feel confident enough to step into that stretch zone and start practicing. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, comment on any of my posts, or connect with me on LinkedIn. Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will.
That's
Thanks
the
for listening.
time. You must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.